Well, welcome everybody to the Design and Planning Preparing the North East for Potential Futures. I'm delighted to have an excellent lineup today. We have Andy von Bradsky, and we have Peter Studdert, and we had John Devlin. I'm going to introduce each of them before they speak. We're going to have roughly 15-minute presentations from each of our speakers. We'll take any clarification points at the end of each one, and then that should leave us a good amount of time for all those questions that you've saved up and hopefully submitted online, which you can find in the question box to the side of your screen, that we'll take then at the end of the session, and hopefully some of your direct questions relevant to your day job. So without further ado,
You've gone mute, Jan.
No, Jan.
Andy, you're not sharing your presentation?
in March 2019, has been heavily involved in the work behind the scenes on the National Model Design Code, which Andy is actually going to share some of the strategic thinking on, and we get a little bit of a sneak preview without giving away any confidences in advance of its launch. Andy, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. I missed a bit of your introduction, but thank you very much for that anyway. Can you hear me and can you see my presentation?
Yes, Andy, I think we're good to go on both, and as I can see them, I'm sure everyone else can as well.
Absolutely brilliant. Well, good morning, everybody, and I'm very pleased to
Andy, I'm just going to interrupt there. You seem to have frozen. What I'm going to suggest is that you actually switch your camera off, and that we actually take your speaking from the start again. Is that okay?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. So if you take it from the top, that would be great.
Okay. So very good morning to everybody, and hopefully you can hear me now. It's been new technology for me and for others, I know, but hopefully we can get going. The National Model Design Code is something that I've been working on for the last year now, since the publication of the National Design Guide. It's nearing publication. We're not able to publish it yet. It's still yet to be fully endorsed and cleared in matters of detail, although matters of principle and very large sections of it are agreed. So I'm able to give you a little bit of insight into what it contains. Before I do that, how do I move my slides on? Oh. Sorry, there we go. Sorry, before I do that, just to say a few words about where government is with quality generally. I've been very encouraged in the 4.5 years I've been at the Ministry of Housing and Community Circle Government as their architectural advisor, that so much has been happening in terms of quality. Not only have we had the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission report, to which I'm sure Peter will refer. We've also had a whole series of initiatives in government around the quality of building, not just of design, but its technical performance, how it operates in with people, and how quality gets reflected in government programs, standards, and so on. So the National Model Design Code fits within that, and there is effectively a building up, if you like, in the NPPF of guidance and advice on how to achieve good design. And of course, we published the National Design Guide this time last year, characteristics of well-designed places, well set out. And important to reflect on this as I go through the presentation, because we are building effectively on those 10 characteristics through the coding work. And just briefly, character, community, climate become quite sort of overarching principles within those 10 criteria or 10 characteristics, and starting with context and the importance of that, of built form, its identity, movement, nature, the relationship of nature to public spaces and the quality of public spaces, uses, and then other issues to do with the quality of homes, environmental issues, and how places are looked after. All of those 10 characteristics appear in the National Model Design Code and are referred to as effectively a kit of parts. The National Design Guide Part 3 is clear. It's worth probably reflecting a bit on what that says, that the NPF will be strengthened to support the use of codes and guides, and that all places are different, have different characteristics, and that the current planning system alludes, I suppose, to the future, or this particular document alludes to how it might be applied in a reform system, which I'll come on to. And of course, strengthening the policy within the NPPF about the ability for local authorities to have confidence to do so, to refuse on the basis of poor design. Just a very brief sort of summary of where we've got to with the code work. We appointed URBED in the summer, and we've been working very closely and jointly together. This hasn't been something government has outsourced to a consultancy to write for it. It has been a very iterative and interactive process between URBED and the Planning Directorate and other parts of government. So really extensive consultation with over 100 people consulted in workshops organised by Design Council. We had an oversight panel with a balance of expert views, and we've involved cross-government departments and other departments, including, of course, the Planning Inspectorate, who have had sight of this. So what is it and what does it contain? It's broken into 3 parts broadly: an introduction, the heart, the what, the why, and the how, and why it's important to have coding. What the process is, and this is the important thing, is that the National Model Design Code is more set out as a step-by-step process for developing local design codes. Includes key parameters, examples, and model community engagement process, and I'll come back onto some of the detail of that later. It includes an extensive section which is guidance notes and illustrations that support how design parameters and design standards are included in design codes. So it's a process map, largely, as I say, and it could apply to different levels of application. So it could be local authority wide, it could be an area within a local authority, it could be a site, or it could even be a plot. So it's an important sort of map of application. I've mentioned about the 10 characteristics, and that is a fundamental underpinning of it. The design parameters are set out, and I'll go through those, and it includes extensive guidance on how to put together codes, guides, and policies. This is an important point, and I just want to draw it out, that actually design codes are seen as one of a number of tools that can be applied to create design policies which are included in local plans or SPDs. And it could be a code or it could be a guide, and this particular toolkit enables both to be informed. It's intended to be used by local authorities fundamentally, but could be used by developers, or likely to be used by developers, and like to be in partnership. So the different scales I've mentioned, which is the diagram on the right, it breaks the process down into 3 stages: analysis, vision, and code, and different steps within that, and consultation related very specifically to those 3 different stages. And we're familiar, of course, with the analysis bit, understanding an area, understanding a wider context, and also understanding the local and site related context. So the model process is to have a full understanding of the context within which you're coding, identifying the site to which you're coding, and making sure that there's a full appreciation of its characteristics. This is an important diagram because it demonstrates a coding plan, i.e. a local area, a town or a city with its hinterland actually identified for different sort of types of development. We call them area types, and there are 10 principal ones, and there could be more subject to the context being understood. And it ranges from effectively the city centre to the rural context and everything in between, including city centre, urban neighbourhoods, inner suburbs, outer suburbs, etc. And this coding plan could be applied by a local authority and identifying its different characteristics. And those characteristics effectively enable coding settings to be applied to different area types. So these are the design parameters that we're working to, as I've mentioned, related back to the National Design Guide. Effectively, the first 6 of those are the sort of things that you would expect to see in design codes. So movement, nature, built form, identity, public space and uses are the sort of things that you would expect to be coded. Other things like homes, buildings, resources, lifespan are more related, I suppose, to, could be in codes, but could be in guides, but also be in design policies. So we've tried to address the application of coding, this document for different applications, codes and guides. Effectively, design parameters address new development at different scales. We've taken 3 particular types: urban neighbourhood, suburban and town centre development as examples. We've demonstrated design solutions, the configurations and the metrics and how they are to be sort of applied. And this table effectively gives you a indication of how you might set out the settings for a code. So that could include things like density, parking ratios. It could include building line or a built form, heights. Those sort of things could be actually tabulated in a chart. So it's combined with effectively a checklist to make sure all the things are thought of that need to go into a code or into other design policies. So all the matrix allow for local application to do the settings or the metrics for their local place. Master plans obviously need to be accompanying design codes for large developments. Within that, area types, as shown on the top right-hand corner, could apply to large-scale development. So you could set out effectively new development using the area types and the settings effectively in the same way as you might for smaller scale development. And important to draw your attention to the fact that other government departments have been heavily involved in this. DFT, Department of Transport, has been consulted widely on its new appointment for Manual for Streets, which is redrafting and bringing up to date. And we've worked very closely with DFT and with CIHT to ensure that what we say in the guide, in the code, will correlate and place the importance on streetscapes as we've, as Manual for Streets is intended to do. And other guidance such as green infrastructure standards, climate change mitigation, adaptation, even reference to modern methods of construction and how one might include content within codes to enable MMC to happen more frequently. Then I suppose the underpinning all this is how you bring democracy forward, which is, you know, a key phrase from the planning reform white paper. And it's important that we, along the way, have a proper understanding of how communities are engaging in this. And of course, there are lots of techniques and workshops, charrettes, walking audits, those sort of face-to-face engagement, which are important and well understood for people in regeneration or who do this kind of work, Prince Foundation, JTP, lots of really good skills out there that can do that. But then it needs to also be combined with how you bring it up to date with social media visualization, and then crucially is how you measure the support that communities give to design codes, which of course is unusual, design coding being usually going through a planning process itself. This is actually setting coding into local plans. So how you get communities to engage in that and how you measure support is a challenge. And then finally, from me, final slide is just how this all relates to the housing white paper, the planning white paper. 44,000 responses to this piece of work or this document, which I would argue is more of a green paper because it sets a lot of issues up that need to be resolved, and it's not entirely clear how the detail that sits behind it might apply. So an awful lot of work going on in the Directorate at the moment on this, to which I'm sort of advising on how design codes sit with this, and a lot of work yet to be done, which I can't sort of talk too openly about, but design coding and guides would become quite important in a new planning system. And we haven't yet put together proposals that set that out. What is clear, though, is the National Design Guide, the National Model Design Code and Manual for the Streets will be used to determine planning decisions. So this document's really important in that regard. And that's the end of my presentation, Jan. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Andy. Well, a whistle-stop tour there of what's going to be up and coming with the National Model Design Code. Great insight and tremendous amount of work clearly going on. Fascinating to hear about your starting basis with the 10 characteristics and the particular focus on those 3 areas of character, community and climate. And how those are key in delivery, as well as then how it will apply and allow for that local context. So I'm sure there's going to be plenty of questions at the end of the session on that basis. So now I'm going to move on to our second speaker, Peter Studdert. Peter's an independent advisor on city planning and design based in Cambridge. He's actually dual qualified as a town planner and architect, a rare breed, but a most valued one at the moment. And also he's previously been Director of Planning at Cambridge City Council, where he played a leading role in the development of the current growth strategy for the Cambridge sub-region in setting high quality standards, which we've seen in many exemplars in the Cambridge environment, particularly around the Quality Charter for Growth. Peter's also chair of Historic England's Historic Places panel and was an advisor to the government's Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission in 2019. And it's really that we're going to get an insight in today's presentation around the origins of the beauty debate and also in terms of the findings and outcome from the Commission. And also how that's going to play into government guidance and what it will mean for planning for each of us as practitioners in today's and the future environment. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Jan. I'm just checking, are you seeing my screen all right?
Yes,
Yep.
We can see your screen and we can see you and hear you well. So if you can keep with us, that would be excellent.
Good.
Thank you.
Well, let's keep our fingers crossed. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Yes, I mean, following on from Andy's fascinating presentation, I'm sure there'll be lots of questions about the code that's emerging from all the work that's going on within the ministry. I'm just taking a step back, really, to look back at the journey that we've been on over the last 2 or 3 years, particularly focusing on this idea of beauty as a concept coming up in planning, which is a concept that really people have been rather nervous to talk about, I think, in planning in recent years. So I'll talk about a little bit where this idea has come from. I'll talk a little bit about the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission that I was an advisor to, and then take that forward into how much of the Commission's recommendations were carried forward into the planning white paper, and then making brief references to some of the things that Andy's already said about what's going on at a government level, and finally, what will this actually mean for planning and how we're going to be operating in the future. I think going back to the origins of the beauty debate, I mean, obviously planning has been concerned about good quality in design for a long time. I mean, since its inception as an activity, and particularly since the formation of the Commission for Architecture and the Built Environment in the late 1990s, and the Urban Task Force with Richard Rogers, design quality has been very much at the heart of what we do as planners. But it's really only in the last 2 to 3 years that this word beauty has started to pop up in the debate. And I think one can trace that back to 2 organisations really. One is the right-wing think tank Policy Exchange, and the other is to this organisation called Create Streets that was a body that was formed about 5 years ago. And the 2 leading people who are driving these 2 organisations, one is Jack Airy, who wrote and was the main author of the 2 reports you see on the left and centre there, which were published in 2018-2019. And Create Streets, which is an organisation formed by Nicholas Boys-Smith, who is an English Heritage or Historic England Commissioner, and obviously is now heading up the national steering body to take forward the whole debate about the use of design codes. And what these 2 bodies, I think the fundamental proposition that's been underpinning these 2 bodies' view of the world is that we need to build an awful lot more housing, and the focus is still very much on housing rather than anything else, and that can be to some extent criticised for that, but we're not building enough housing, and one of the reasons we're not building enough housing is that people object to having new housing built in their area, and one of the reasons why people object is that we're not building houses that are beautiful enough, and therefore, to take the argument back in reverse, if we build more beautifully, people will object less, therefore it will be easier to build more houses that we need. And that's the fundamental proposition that's been driving all this. And again, one of the early movers in this discussion was the late philosopher Sir Roger Scruton, who had contributed to some of these reports in Policy Exchange and given some lectures, starting the whole debate off at quite a competitive level, I would say, quite critical of contemporary architecture, seeing Le Corbusier as the kind of root of all evil in placemaking, and very much coming from what I would call a Prince of Wales point of view of traditional architecture being really the answer to all the problems. And if only we built nice traditional places, then everything would be fine and people would be happy. And in some ways, that was how the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission was launched, with Sir Roger Scruton as the chair of the commission. He sadly fell very badly ill during the process and sadly passed away at the beginning of 2020. And so Nicholas Boys-Smith came in as co-chair to see the commission's report through to the end. But I think it was the starting, so when it was set up, I think a lot of people were quite concerned about what this meant. Are we all going to be forced into a kind of a stylistic straitjacket? But as the commission progressed, there's some good people appointed onto the commission. Mary Parsons from Places for People, Gail Mayhew from Norwich, who's been very much involved in stewardship and looking at the motives behind the why people build and how one can improve the motives of developers and make them think more long term. And there was an advisory board of which I was one of, I think, 8 or 10 advisors who were advising the commission. And the commission took a lot of evidence, went around the country, came to Cambridge, and I showed them a lot of the work that we'd been doing, looking at Accordia, which had won the Sterling Prize in 2008, and some of the more contemporary housing developments around the edge of the city. The commission also visited Newcastle and was very impressed by developments like the Mailings down at Ousburn, but also visited Poundbury in Dorset and some of the other duchy schemes down in Cornwall. So it was quite a broad intake of evidence that the commission was looking at. And I think that the breadth of the evidence that was taken, I think, led in the end to, I think, a very good report in lots of ways. And I think it was very widely welcomed by a lot of people, both in the architecture and planning profession and in the wider industry, really saying that planning authorities need to be much more confident about asking for beauty and asking for high quality in new developments. And also basing this very much on good early community involvement. So getting community buy-in to the process of setting standards and taking a lot of the debate in some ways, a lot of the discussion that wastes so much time in planning authorities, so that there's much clearer advice given to developers on particular sites so that schemes can move forward much more quickly. And I suppose that the ultimate example of that is this idea of a fast track for beauty, that if standards are specified in enough detail with enough clarity that there can be some sort of fast track for schemes that tick all the boxes. Now that's, I think, a very interesting and debatable point, which I'm sure we'll come to later in the discussion. But also this report picks up a lot of Gail Mayhew's ideas about stewardship, and there was 2 very good side reports that were written by Charlie Dugdale at Knight Frank that really looked at landowners, why do landowners tend to sell up to the volume house builders rather than take a longer term stewardship view of the development of their land. And a lot of those are down to the taxation regime, which frankly are beyond me as a humble planner. But certainly I think are ideas that need to be taken up by the Treasury. They weren't addressed in the planning white paper, but hopefully when the government comes to giving a comprehensive response to the Commission's report, which I think is due sometime early in the new year, it'll be interesting to see what they say about these taxation changes to make it more easy for landowners to take a long-term view. A lot about greening towns and cities, the importance of landscape, a lot about improving skills within local authorities, but also within the development industry, greater resources and greater leadership, the proposal that all local authorities ought to have a chief officer in charge of leading on placemaking and setting the vision was one of the recommendations that came from the Commission that was picked up by the planning white paper, and also better management of places over time, which I think is one of the areas with local authorities particularly struggling from shortage of resources, how one can ensure that places are really looked after once they've been built. And seeing beauty at 3 scales, which I think was also the important thing. So moving away just from facades, although facades do tend to kind of rather peek back into the debate, but actually starting at the large scale, having places, designing new settlements in the right place so that they sit properly within the landscape that they're setting, making beautiful places, so looking at places in the round, streets, squares and parks and the spirit of the place, as well as then getting down to the individual buildings and the actual design of the buildings themselves. So that the Commission was trying to look at, to bring the argument and bring the debate up at a strategic level as well as the very specific level. And as I say, a lot of these ideas were taken forward into the planning white paper. And although I think a lot of people would see the planning white paper as being mainly about deregulation and centralisation on a lot of the key themes, nevertheless, in the sort of what I think they call the pillar 2 within the planning white paper, good design and proactive planning and proactive design and embedding that in local plans is obviously one of the main challenges that the planning white paper sets to local authorities and to the planning profession. And some very good statement about not just going from net no harm in new development, but actually saying we want net gain. We want new development to enhance places, not damage them. Easy to say, not so easy to do possibly in practice. Design guides and design codes based on genuine community involvement, picking up a lot of those themes from really going back to the policy exchange days. The fast track to beauty very much embedded in there, in a way running alongside the permitted development rights. And there's some worrying things within the planning white paper about talking about machine readable tools for development control. And it's interesting with Andy's presentation, all the kind of tick boxes. I don't know, I worry a little bit about this all becoming a bit of a tick box, and that if you tick all the boxes, you get an automatic consent. I think there are people within government who see that as being the way forward. I think as practitioners, I think we have to ask, yeah, well, maybe sounds interesting, but can it be delivered on the ground? And I think that's one of the issues we might want to come back to in discussion. Obviously, we're getting this national body now to support the delivery of design codes, and that seems to be set up in a very sensible way. A good broad advisory board there. That will be reporting back to the minister in March. We'll see who's the minister is at that when we come to that. And ministers seem to come and go, particularly on planning and design, but let's hope it's a minister who still believes in this agenda. And of course, the chief officer for design and placemaking, very much there as well in the planning white paper. And this is all backed up by the National Design Guidance agenda that Andy has very comprehensively covered. The National Design Guide produced by Tibbles, which very much builds on the existing good practice for large-scale new developments, very much looking at new neighbourhoods rather than design in the round, but still very, very valuable, and I think putting together a lot of good stuff. the National Model Design Code, which obviously we're waiting to see how that comes out in the new year, the National Advisory Board, the Manual for Streets to be updated. And again, I think that's going to be very important because streets and cars and parking, we know these are the issues that actually really we struggle with on individual sites. But of course, meanwhile, we've had the National Infrastructure Strategy a couple of weeks ago, and with all the billions being shelled out here and there, what have we got for planning? Well, 12 million. Well, that's not going to go very far, I'm afraid. So resources, I think, are still going to be an issue. But just a couple of slides on coding. I mean, this is a code that we used on one of the developments around Cambridge. Clay Farm, as it originally was, Great Knighton, as it's now been rebranded by Countryside. 2,500 homes on the southern side of Cambridge, taken out of the Greenbelt as part of our local plan. Here we were using very much what I would call a form-based code, which was produced after the grant of outline planning permission. It was a condition of the outline permission and had to be produced with community engagement by, and obviously input from all the authorities as well, but produced by the developer. And that then informed the submission of reserved matters applications that then followed. And here we were looking for contemporary architecture, but contemporary architecture that still had traditional street-based forms, was well connected into Cambridge by the guided bus. On that little plan there, the red line there is the Cambridge guided bus, and also producing as much accessible green space as it did green built form. So where you see on that plan there, the green corridor running up to the east of the new development, that was very much an integral part of the master plan. So in a way, this was, I think, conforming to a lot of the, I hope, the good practice that we will see coming forward. And I think for me, for a new development, this is the right sort of code, the right sort of level, encouraging good architects to come in and be inventive. Obviously, the more prescriptive sort of code is pound brick, and may not be the sort of code that we would that will be encouraged, but highly labour intensive. This is obviously imposed by the duchy itself rather than by the local planning authority. But this is coded right down to the last doorknob and door number. So they're very labour intensive, produces very popular schemes, but whether this is actually is realistic as a model for following is, I think, something that we will see. So I think in conclusion, what does this mean? Well, as I said, the planning white paper is mainly about deregulation and centralisation, but I think we've got to grasp the opportunity that design and this focus on beauty is one where power is genuinely being devolved locally to local authorities. But there is a question about can community or can beauty or a lack of it really be a material planning consideration? I mean, can planning committees say, you know, we refuse the scheme because it's not beautiful enough? I mean, that's in a way is what is being suggested, but what will the lawyers have to say about that? Well, a lot, I suspect. And also this possibility of getting a local consensus about beauty. Yeah, maybe, I mean, some areas where there's a very strong local vernacular, where there's a very articulate local community, I guess that could be possible. I think in the areas where that's been tested, that has worked, but is that going to be possible everywhere? And is it possible to really provide this empirical evidence that people keep on talking about? And is it sort of ending up in some of what I would call an empirical subjectivity, which almost is a sort of a contradiction in terms? But this resource question is going to be really important. Will the resources actually be there for local authorities to do the level of consultation required? Given that the planning white paper suggests that all this upfront consultation and coding is then the basis for removing a lot of the consultation at the actual planning application stage at the end of the process, which is obviously an area that people are very concerned about. Can digital technology play a key role in this? Maybe it can, and certainly there's lots of opportunities to do that. But I think at the end of the day, we still got to confront the fact that in some cases, local communities still won't want any new development, no matter how beautiful, and that planning will still have to play a leadership role in driving the need for new development, but obviously making sure that it is acceptable as far as possible and does enhance place in the way that national guidance is now saying. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. Well, it's certainly reassuring to hear the consideration of the three scales, and that it's not just about facadism, which there's been a lot of talk about, that it starts at that strategic level with the sustainable settlements, working down to the places in the round, and also then to the building level. I share your worry about tick boxes, and although I can see the benefits of technology and digital, machine reading could be a soulless approach to that, and certainly is one to watch for. And I think you're right to caution about, will we really get local consensus, and will we really have strong enough direction, guidance and legislation to withhold consent where we don't have, in inverted commas, beautiful development? I'm sure they are things that we will return to in the questions, so thank you very much. Now we're on to our third and final speaker, John Devlin. John is Chair of Design North East. He's an architect and urban designer by profession, with over 40 years of experience of delivering major projects and regeneration initiatives across the UK in both the public and private sectors, and as a practicing architect and urban designer and project director and client. He's particularly identified with the multi-award-winning multi-project arts-led urban regeneration of Gateshead Quays, which I'm sure many of our attendees are very familiar with. So on that basis, I'm going to hand over to John about design-led approach at the local implementation level. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Now, can you see my screen okay?
Yes, we can, thanks, John. That's great. You're coming through loud and clear, and we can see your presentation.
Thank you very much. Right, I'll just get this out of the way, 2 seconds. Yes, well, thank you very much for inviting me to do this presentation today. My perspective is very much from the delivery side, from the battlefront, as it were, trying to put this whole thing together. I suppose the first thing to say is, well, what's the topic here? Things quite integrate quite well here, because we are after producing well-designed buildings and spaces and places in the North East. And the objective of today's seminar is, quote, training and support to councils and communities to help them better engage with design and planning, and that is straight out of our internal brief in any case. Our methodology is that we are critical friends, and I'll explain more about that as we go through, but we tend not to pontificate. We tend to be there to support, to help, to look over the shoulder, and to help organisations and local authorities make the best of what they've been given in terms of development. So first of all, perhaps a little bit about what is Design North East. It is the region's design review and enabling service, and has been going since 2009, established under the Regional Development Agency 1 North East, as part of the initiative which rolled out the idea of design reviews being spread across the country. We are currently now in a new guise, a profit for purpose company supported by a pool of 35 built environment experts, and our whole ethos is to give independent, objective, impartial advice on projects, not to come in with an agenda, but to take each organisation and its needs into account in developing the brief for whatever we need to do. And the aim is to achieve projects that, and this is quite important for us, financial, physical, social and economic sustainability, which is a balanced and broad spectrum approach in terms of sustainability, and actually acknowledges the reality of developing the northeast of England, because clearly what land values, property development values, the rest can achieve down south are not reflected up here. And we're trying to do the best we possibly can to maximise that sustainability, so that developments, once they're developed, are actually sustainable. So we've got a series of tools for doing this. Building for a Healthy Life, BHL training. We also do enabling work, which is working with organisations, authorities on option appraisal and challenge at the very earliest thinking of development. For example, we have a long-term relationship with South Tyneside Council, where when they first thought something had to happen to the town centre, they brought us in to run a challenge session and an idea session. Then when they decided that perhaps some sort of large-scale master plan might be an idea, they brought us back to challenge the thinking about that. And that's progressed all the way, right the way through to the 365 master plan, which they have, and the major projects which have come out of that, which then be subject to design review. So it's a long-term relationship where there's a trust in both directions. We also look at gateway reviews, which is the readiness to invest exercise to make sure the projects really are sustainable financially in going forward. Design reviews we all know about, peer review of schemes, and also we run out training sessions on specific topics. Recently, we've been going back to the old BFL schemes which have been developed in the North East and doing feedback evaluations for Homes England. So that helps inform then of how successful those have been. And we can then make comparisons to the Building for a Healthy Life and feed that back into the training as well. We also, every time there's a major publication produced by central government, we run training sessions, introductory sessions to try and get that through to all the local authorities and interested parties in the North East. One of the other things we've been doing is expanding our expert panel, bringing on board sort of more community engagement expertise, looking at not just landscaping, but ecology, bringing on board ecologists. So we really do have built environment experts in the broader sense. Where we've got expertise in low energy buildings, we're asking those people to also look at challenge the thinking, challenge the presumptions in terms of what a low energy building should do. Does it really make sense to spend many thousands of pounds on mechanical ventilation systems in a dwelling? Does that really make sense long term? Committing people to energy usage. We've also got expertise in project and program management, which we can deploy. And currently we're trying very hard to diversify the panel to reflect society in its broadest sense, which is easier said than done, because I don't think the North East particularly is a particularly diverse society. But we try. And we're also recently doing more about alternative funding expertise, where we have relationships with the investment banks and have methodologies for helping local authorities develop infrastructure and utilities. In terms of training, we've recently been running out the National Design Guide training and the Councillor's Companion, which is the accompanying document to that, and Building for a Healthy Life. One of the things we're doing, though, is helping the lay assessor understand what is good design, which is not that easy, especially when you have to introduce contextuality. Some people, particularly planning authority members, really do struggle slightly with the concept of, well, if it's good design there, why is it good design here? And having to understand what they should be looking for in terms of contextuality is quite important. It's particularly important as well if those same elected members are going to be part of the decision-making panel in selecting a development which has been acquired through a design code process. So just in terms of what's the new or changing place should look like, you know, have a contemporary mix of uses and activities, you know, fit for purpose, accommodating use as well, ease of movement and high quality public space, adaptable to change needs and circumstances, efficiency in terms of land and resources, and back to what Peter was saying earlier about beauty, the appearance is appealing and appreciated, and how do you quantify that? And have a distinctive positive identity and a sense of place. Particularly difficult when you're dealing with house builders who have standardized products. This slide sort of links the three left-hand documents together, which is about, we now have the MPPF and the National Design Guide, which helps you navigate from key design issues through into the policy which supports those decisions, and then the Councillor's Companion, which if people are not familiar with it, please get in touch and we will get copies to you. Unfortunately, I don't think it's available in PDF form. We'd have to send you hard copies. But it was a Councillor's Companion written by a councillor to interpret the National Design Guide so that the councillors, but from the councillor's perspective, so the whole lot ties together. On the right-hand side, you can see there's the Holborn site design brief for South Tyneside Council, and in that document, as we wrote that design brief for them, for this site, for acquiring the developers for the site, we made the link between these three documents to bring the whole thing together successfully, we believe. So we know what's been said today about the National Design Code. I won't go back that in any detail, but it's supposed to be a code. It's expected to be a baseline for the local planning authorities to take into account when dealing with planning applications. I think the really important thing from our perspective is the government expects planners to refuse development if it fails to improve the character or quality of an area, it says there. That's an extraordinary thing to actually have in black and white. They expect planners to refuse development. And as Peter says, what tools do you need to have in place to allow that to happen and give people support? Looking at design codes, I'm going to do a quick skip through this. What are they? Why are they important to me? What should inform them? They're not new, I suppose, is the first thing to say. Upton's 15 years old now, just seemed like yesterday. But good local design guides should be concise and positive. We're currently working with one of the local authorities in the North East to develop a design code. So we are slightly ahead of the game here and having to try and make up the rules as we go along, because this document will run in its own form and then be overtaken by the work that our colleagues are doing this morning. Prepared by local planning authorities, neighbourhood planning groups, we know that. Codes are focused around design characteristics and they've got to be firmly fixed and must have design elements. And it sets out the strategic requirements for the future of the site. Great places, new communities, tremendous. But when you look at the contextual information here, 10 important characteristics of good places, 1 to 10. As an exercise, I decided that what I would do a couple of weeks ago, in anticipation of this, would be to go out and drive around as many of the new residential development sites as I could find in the North East, armed with these 10 points and, you know, with expanded descriptions of them, and try to assess the gap between what the aspiration in design coding says in terms of this and what's actually there. And it actually reminds me of travelling on the train about a year ago when the train guard suddenly said, as we were approaching Huddersfield, "Ladies and gentlemen, when alighting from the train, please mind the gap between expectation and reality." And I have to say, my expectation and the reality of looking at the housing developments was a genuine surprise. Out of all the sites I looked at, I would say there were 1.5 of the sites actually came anywhere near delivering the aspirations that we would expect of the quality of design fit for the 21st century. Shocking, really. But these places are being built now. Some of them are almost built out. I suspect there hasn't been a designer's hand anywhere near them for, oh well, what is it? I think from the last time I saw the figures, it used to say that less than 0.5% of all dwellings by number were designed by architects. Now, I'm not suggesting that architects are going to produce perfect schemes all the time, but it does make you wonder about the amount of effort that's gone in and the lack of continuity of involvement of designers through to the delivery stage of residential developments. This design coding process can't come quick enough. Why? Design codes are a mix of generic good practice and advice, and so they should be, and site-specific requirements. So there's just a set of principles which I hope come out in the model design code, which will support a good starting point for the development of any schemes which the design code is written for. Then obviously there's the site-specific requirements which localize everything. Our expertise recently has been in writing the design codes, putting together training sessions for the evaluators, and giving support and confidence to the elected members in terms of interpreting this and having an active RAG score booklet. What you're looking at here on the right-hand side is an extract from a recent design code for one of the authorities for Burtree. And what it has is a supplement, which can either be a hard copy or an electronic copy, which allows you to put RAG ratings against the criteria. I won't go through the criteria in detail here, but the traffic light approach does seem to be something which elected members and officers quite like, because it's easy to deal with and very quick to see. And if you look at the small print in the middle of the rear document there, it actually says any red equals a fail. So if it's well designed, they get a green. If it's not yet fully resolved, needs a pause, an amber. If it doesn't work at all, it gets a red. If it gets a red, it's rejected, it's failed. One of the things we discovered is that in writing the design codes and the sort of preambles, it's actually worth going back to some very basic stuff like Kevin Lynch's image of the city, paths, edges, districts, nodes, landmarks. What is it that's going to allow you to navigate around this new community? We would add into the word gateways as well. It's worth digging these things back out, digging these documents back out and using them. The Kevin Lynch stuff comes up regularly in our design reviews on the larger developments. Design codes, will they have any weight? They need to be given as much weight as possible. The model design code we very much look forward to seeing, and the Building Better Beautiful Commission outputs all integrating and supporting each other. There are a huge number of players involved in the development of sites. Coordinating everybody, coordinating the documentation, we think is extremely important. I think the challenge is to keep the suite of documents coordinated and mutually supportive in the first instance. Who's going to do that is the question. Being resolute and standing firm for high design standards, again, what is good design? How will you describe it? How will you recognize it? All of this needs to be written down, recorded, and shared across the country, so we have got a common stance in terms of how we appreciate things, not slavishly copying things and inappropriate design in different places, but bringing it all together. And overcoming the investment at any price. You can just hear the local authority, that members, elected members, saying, but you know, if we object to this on design grounds, then they'll just go somewhere else. We have to get a uniform stance across the country so that development can't just go wandering around looking for the cheapest and local authority with the lowest standards. And I think we need to start delivering the master plans. How many master plans are produced by local authorities over the years and they've just put in a drawer, job done? Deliver them. We need to start delivering these things. What it needs innovation. It needs vision on the part of the planners, ingenuity, teamwork, creativity. It needs all of that. So the conclusion is that I think the government appears to be genuinely trying to create an integrated suite of documents and policies for planning. I think some of the aspirations may have suspect foundations, but you know, we can rise to the challenge. But for the first time in a long, long time, I think there's an opportunity for innovation here in planning, and for people to actually, you know, deliver stuff. Planning become a delivery organisation. So my plea to everyone is, please, with all these gifts from central government, don't blow it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, John, and on quite a significant ask at the end. Thank you for that local insight as well as to actually what's already going on and ahead of the game in the region. The context is key, sense of place, and your 10 characteristic of good places. But the quote for me from today's session is, mind the gap between expectation and reality. Oh, that is so true. We just have a short while now for some questions, and we now have all the panelists available, so thank you very much. If I can just start with some of the questions we've had, a lot of them aimed at Andy, I think, but if everybody could chip in, I'll start maybe with Andy. Will design coding actually make a difference to the design quality of dwellings produced by developers, do you think? Andy, do you want to start us off on that one?
It's an interesting one. Yeah, done well, of course. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of development gets built by house builders that don't use professionals at all, and well, I say that sort of rather hastily, but it's true that, you know, we don't have architects actually designing a lot of development, or urban designers. It's often done in-house. It's often done by their own team, and the placemaking aspect is sort of a secondary aspect to delivery and how many units get built over what time. So a lot of decisions get made in the interest of the developer. Design coding is a process that has to be undertaken by urban designers and architects, and landscape architects, of course. So by making that a requirement locally, i.e., you know, to have design codes locally done, it either requires the skilled professional to be in the local authority who is able to understand and apply that, or local authorities will need to appoint external consultants to help them do it. I mean, clearly that links to what Peter was talking about, available resource, and you know, what John was talking about, how well to do that and how to get engagement with communities and with councillors. But at the end of the day, I'm sure that a design code's done well by the right people for willing authorities who are prepared to use them as a tool. Yes, it will make a difference.
Thank you on that. I'm going to move on to a rapid fire one, which I'll come to each of you on. A very interesting question, beauty versus viability. How do we make that sustainable, good design and development viable, particularly in a region where the values in the North East, for example, are very varied? And Peter, can I come to you first? I'm going to go quick fire around each of the three of you on that one. Thoughts, views?
Well, I think that this is why there has to be a lot of local control and local determination, because it's only at the local authority level that people understand the market and the values. And obviously, if we're going for a lot of brownfield regeneration, there are a lot of costs, and quite a lot of those costs of site development aren't really known until you actually start digging holes. So I think there has to be some flexibility. I think that's why I'm a bit cautious about the use of coding on smaller regeneration sites. I think they're fine on large greenfield sites, but I think it's very difficult to take away the discretion and the negotiation and the local experience on these smaller, tricky infill sites. And I think that the viability obviously is one very important consideration. Otherwise, you'll just end up with nothing happening.
Yes, John, views on that one quickly.
Very quickly, I think you can design a cheap product that works well, and you can design an expensive product that works well. It's the design that counts. The design, pay for the design, which is a tiny amount of the capital value of the product, and you can have perfectly good, perfectly acceptable development.
That's great in a nutshell. Andy, some thoughts from you on that one?
Well, good design doesn't need to cost more. It needs to follow certain principles, and you need the right people who set those principles out. So it's about employing the right people to do that job.
Couldn't agree more. Get it right from the outset, design it in, and you should end up with good outcomes and a good product. Excellent. Just moving on to a resourcing one, Andy, this probably comes at you a little bit, but certainly with each of you have talked about skills and resources to some degree or reference that. At the moment, there's a commitment to 12 million. That's way short of the Royal Town Planning Institute's ask for 500 million. And we've seen successive under-resourcing and really hollowing out of local authority skills and resources. To really deliver this, don't we need significant investment in services, training and outcomes rather than a sum of money? Angie, do you want to start on that one?
Well, you know, the real test will be what does government put into this, and you know, I'm representing government here, but I acknowledge that resources within local authorities to deliver what they're setting out is key. The design body that's been set up, or the steering group for the design body that's been set up, is you know, obviously conscious of that particular issue, and will be raising it, no doubt, as part of the reporting in from the design body to Secretary of State, which is expected in March. And then we're at the moment planning. I mean, we have effectively got the design toolkit, no, the design code toolkit ready, and so we're at the moment preparing for how you might test it. You know, how does it actually work in practice, and what are the implications of that? So we'll be doing that through a public consultation process, and we'll also be running pilots. So it'll be really interesting in the North East to actually sort of test this with some local authorities who I'm sure will want to put their hand up and say, yeah, I'd like to trial this and see what the implication is. I think the issue, was mentioned about community engagement. You know, it's a serious endeavour to do that properly. You need the right people, the right skills in the local authority to do it. So, you know, there are challenges there, no doubt.
Peter, do you have any additional thoughts on that one?
Well, yes, I mean it's ironic in a way that the last 10 years it's been the largest kind of erosion of resources within local authorities that we've seen, certainly in my professional career, as well as the removal of all the regional agencies, the RDAs, a lot of the implementation agencies like Cambridgeshire Horizons, as I worked with for 3 years, that were funded through John Prescott's regeneration programme. So we've got a lot of catching up to do, and I think that the 12 million in the National Infrastructure Strategy, I think, was absolutely pathetic, and I worry deeply that that is going to be the fundamental problem. That what we're getting is a lot of fine words. We're getting a lot of people who are sort of saying, well, you know, if we build nice places for nice people, it's all going to be fine. Well, actually, you know, planning is a pretty hard-nosed business. Local authorities need resources, they need skills, they need organisations like John's to back them up. I mean, I helped set up a regional design architecture centre in the east of England, Shape East, which folded once all the funding was removed in 2011. So I hope that a lot of the skills support will be rolled out at a regional level through organisations like John's, not just diktat from Whitehall.
And I think that's a good point to turn to John for the final comment. And also, I think we've had a request for a suggestion of a trial on a specific site, which I know John and the others will note. John, some final thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's about launching, a good launch. Projects need a good launch. If we can get the brief right, and I think that, you know, we need to help local authorities and the other organisations who want to propose something to get a good solid brief and put that into the context of the design coding with a good set of designers, you've got a successful, chances are you'll have a very successful development. That's what we find. If you go back through all of our design reviews and all the documentation we have in the archive, in every single case, it's pretty much been true. Good launch. Good lunch.
Thank you. Well, it's been tremendous. I think we've got a real insight. Thank you from the government level down to the local level. So thank you, Andy, Peter and John. I think there's going to be plenty more to come in this area. I'm sure it's a subject we will be revisiting, particularly in practice and rollout. I think watch this space for the launch, which we look forward to. And I also think there's real opportunity here to put sustainable design back in the heart of planning and place. So all the practitioners out there, I think grasp this as an opportunity, and let's push for that investment, training and resource, and see what we can make of it. Thank you all.
Thank you.